Sup, Chemo? I'm Leon, the e-reading maniac, coming at you with the long-awaited Part 3 of my newer horror book series. This is a series in which I discuss books published in the last 10 to 20 years, post-millennium horror, let's say. These are more bite-sized reviews, not nearly as long-winded or, let's say, as in-depth as my vintage horror book reviews. So we got three more hearty recommendations today. So before I get to the reviews proper, however, I do want to give a shout out to my homie Tim Curran, who recently re-released his elusive first compendium or collection of short stories, Bone Marrow Stew. This was recently put out on Kindle version. This is a book that I originally had the hardcover of, which is now out of print. This one was put out by Tasmaniac Publications in 2011. And it's a pretty cool edition. This was actually sent to me, signed by Tim Curran for my birthday a number of years back. When we were in correspondence, which just tells you a little bit of how cool that motherfucker is. But yeah, this is a pretty cool edition. It's got artwork by Keith Minion, and yeah, it's signed. And but it's been out of print for a number of years. I actually never read that version. When I saw the Kindle version was out, I quickly purchased it on my Kindle, read it, and loved it. And I do highly recommend that book. I think I mentioned in my mini review of Dead Sea Chronicles that I feel like Tim Curran is best in the shorter format. Now, some of these short stories are a little longer. In fact, one of them may even be a full-blown novella. But I feel like the stories are, tighter. They're less padded and repetitive, and he really gets a chance to shine in his short fiction. And these are some really cool stories. I made a little short list of some of the standouts to me. A story called The Eyes of Howard Curlix was a really cool story. Definitely an homage to Lovecraft's From Beyond. The Chattering of Tiny Teeth. Really cool, descriptive World War I horror. World War I is a subject of fascination, it seems like, for Tim Curran. He has a lot of stories set during that time, and for good reason, because of what a horrific experience that would be, right? And then when you add supernatural shit to it, it just makes it even worse. Long in the Tooth, really cool mythological horror. Creature type horror. One Dark September Night, a fantastic 1970s set coming of age horror that really reminded me of something like Joe R. Lansdale's story, The Night They Missed the Horror Show. Well done, very well done. The Puppeteer, which I thought was one of the most inventive and kind of interesting and cool horror short stories I'd read in a while. And then also The Wreck of the Ghost, which was kind of like a Moby Dick inspired horror story. And and he loves his seafaring stuff, as is evident with Dead Sea and Dead Sea Chronicles, and really gets a chance to shine descriptively. In fact, I will read to you guys a short passage from the that latter story that I mentioned, The Wreck of the Ghost, because I think it's kind of a good demonstration of his kind of writing chops. So. For the ocean around the ship was on fire. At least that's how it looked. A great white phosphorescence erupted around her with bubbles and froth and plumes of steam. And out of the stagnant depths, the beast rose up like some slimy fetal nightmare expelled from a womb. I saw its heaving, nebulous form rising, pulsing and throbbing, the color of white fat and set with barnacles and fungal marine growths. From it grew eel-like ropes and pale coiling tentacles, things like the stinging tendrils of sea anemones and the whips of jellyfish, flanks pitted like coral and honeycombed like the flesh of bryozoans. An absolute monster. Hideous in all respects. Bloated and serpentine, a thing of slobbering blowhole mouths and wide gelid sea-green eyes, slimy and offensive and somehow primeval. It was composed of everything that haunted the sunken ravines and other things you could not imagine. as if life, all life, had sprouted from this chimeric, multiform monstrosity, a seething garden of organic profusion. So yeah, just to give you an idea of just like the rich descriptive creativity on display there. So yeah, very if you're looking for a cool like short story collection to go with whatever novels and stuff you're reading, or if you're just a short story fan, definitely check Bone Marrow Stew out by Tim Curran. All right, so getting into our first novel, or I guess technically it might even be considered a novella. We've got An Army of Skin by Morgan K. Tanner. Now, this book is pretty unknown, I think. It was self-published in 2019. It was actually the cover of this book that caught my eye. So, a little note to all you authors, it definitely does help to invest in getting a good cover. The old saying is definitely true. We judge books by their covers all the time, and that's definitely what caught my eye and got me initially kind of hip to this book. So I'm going to read the synopsis to kind of go over the plot with you guys. After losing his mother to a brain tumor, Trevor King feels totally alone in the world. Someone needs to pay for her death, and Dr. Mellick, Trevor's work colleague and family GP, is the man he holds responsible. Trevor's yearning for vengeance leads him to concoct a vicious plot to frame the doctor for multiple murders. Trevor skins the corpses, turning them into elaborate art pieces after being inspired by a mysterious textbook. But as the skins of the flayed victims come to life and continue the killings for him, Trevor wonders whether he is in too deep. When Dr. Mellick goes missing, Trevor becomes convinced the doctor is planning a similar scheme to bring him down. But as Trevor discovers the truth of his mother's death and his own life, this murderous path becomes more of a calling. So, An Army of Skin by Morgan K. Tanner. So, first of all, this book is written in first-person point of view, which is a little different, I think, because a lot of modern horror, typically is not written in first person. Admittedly, I've never really been a huge fan of first-person narration. It does work well with character pieces, and in a way, this is one. But, typically I prefer third person. However, I have to say the narrator of this book really grew on me, and I really came to appreciate his voice and found myself really enjoying it. So I think the author made a wise decision to write this from the protagonist's point of view. Now, when you're reading the book, at times the narrator's thoughts and actions may seem inconsistent, but you quickly realize as you read this thing that this narrator is far from reliable, and you really have to take everything he says, his sort of view of reality, with a grain of salt, as you would like, Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. So one thing I did like also about the narration and the narrator's POV was that it was funny. There's actually a great sense of humor that this narrator shows. For instance, I wrote a little quote here. This is coming from the narrator describing himself. I'd like to think that I don't really have to have the look of someone who would have to pay for sex. I'm young, not fat, and don't have a face that looks like I've been beaten with a shovel and then pissed on with acidic alien blood. It's just like kind of weird and unique, right? Another thing I really liked about this book, so it has the psychological element. It definitely is kind of like psychology, but it's also incredibly gruesome. It's incredibly gory. Lots of just outlandish set pieces with, like exposed red muscle and sinew. I wrote another quote here. The flayed man sat in the chair and was no longer butchered on the floor. His muscles now glistened with a green ooze. His tiny cock shriveled on the ground before him like a necrotic potato chip. I mean, come on, that's delightful, right? This book, it's fun. It's a debut novel. It's a debut self-published novel, so it's not perfect. But it's got enough fun stuff to make up for areas where, it may be a little amateurish. We get cool stuff like murder, dismemberment, flayed sentient skin that floats and even speaks. We'd get some like Clive Barker-esque human art pieces that are comprised of, intestines that bind limbs and exposed red muscles. So yeah, it's a fun book and it's very short. I think I didn't note the page number, but it may even be considered a novella. It's a fast, fun read. I actually read it yesterday on a plane ride from Chicago to Orange County, California, and it kept me entertained the entire time. It's very readable. It's got a delightful prose, cool scenes. It's got cool, like a cool setting in sort of like this creepy hospital where nefarious things may be occurring. And overall, I enjoyed it. So for kind of like a book from a new up and coming, writer, self-published. I say, check it out on Kindle. It's cheap and it's a fast, fun read. All right, so our second book that we're going to be talking about today is The Sorrows by Jonathan Janz. This book was first published in 2011 by the now defunct Sam Hain Publishing, and it has subsequently been published by Flame Tree Press. A couple years back, they put it out in paperback and Kindle versions. I will go ahead and read the synopsis for this one. Ben Shadeland and Eddie Blaze are the hottest young music composers in Hollywood. Fresh off an Oscar nomination, they've just been chosen to score a big-budget horror movie by Lee Stanley, the most demanding director in film. But Ben, the creative half of the duo, hasn't written a note since his wife divorced him and got custody of their 3-year-old son. Chris Blackwood is the gambling-addicted heir to the Blackwood fortune, which includes the Sorrows, an island off the coast of Northern California. The island and its castle have been uninhabited since a series of gruesome, unexplained murders in 1925. But Chris needs money, and to get it, he allows Ben, Eddie, Claire Hardin, an aspiring composer, and Ava Rosales, Lee Stanley's gorgeous assistant, to stay a month in Castle Blackwood. Eddie is certain an eerie, isolated setting is just what Ben needs to find musical inspiration for a horror film. But what they find is more horrific than any movie. So, essentially, this book, The Sorrows, is your classic monster in a castle book. Although, in this case, it's a damn good one. It's first off, you have to really commend Jonathan Janz for his storytelling ability here. The book is really well plotted and well paced. I was completely wrapped up in the narrative from the beginning, and I stayed hooked. There were some parts where, my interest waned a little bit, but it does a good job of hooking you and kind of sustaining, for the most part, that narrative sort of like intrigue there. I thought it had a really good structure. It was impressively sort of, like outlined and structured, especially for a first novel. Although I don't know if this was the first book that he wrote. I think it was maybe the second book he wrote, but the first book that he published. But it is clear from reading it that Jonathan Janz is definitely a natural born storyteller. Another thing that is immediately apparent when you read Jonathan Janz's books, and this is the second book of his I read after reading a book called Savage Species, which I also enjoyed, is his command of language. The craftsmanship of his prose is impressive. Jonathan Janz is actually an English teacher in Indiana, and you can tell he's an English teacher because his books have like perfect grammar. He does all the things that I, as an English teacher, try to teach my students. Things like varying your sentence structure, your syntax, choosing interesting diction, using the active voice, showing, not telling. And so, for me, who sometimes, when you read these indie authors, especially the self-published ones, it can sometimes be a little frustrating when you see a lot of like mistakes and grammatical errors and things. But with Jonathan Janz, you don't see any of that because he knows what he's doing, and he also has usually good editors. But I thought this book was, not only the plot was interesting, but I thought it delved into the pathology of its characters, pretty well, exploring all of these guys' hidden, fears and desires and, apprehensions and things like that. There's definitely an emotional core to this story that kind of beats like a heart amidst all of the, other, kind of crazy, carnage and bloodshed that ensues. Especially, with the setting being this place, this castle that these guys go to, where all of their, their ids or their inner desires sort of become amplified and, cause these guys to act out sort of like their basest, predilections and desires. So, things like greed, jealousy, sexual desires, and, they ultimately start to turn against each other. And so that, that psychological element, in addition to all the other fun stuff, I thought was really good. In this book, I feel like Janz had some fun, kind of like channeling Dick Lehman, and we definitely get some Richard Lehman style toxic male voyeurism. We also get some great Ed Lee style sex scenes, although not nearly as explicit as Ed Lee. We get some monster sex, which is always fun. And interestingly, this book touches on some Me Too stuff. Even though it was published well before the Me Too movement, but with regards to the respected director who was mentioned in the synopsis, who is ostensibly like a great humanitarian and an advocate of women's rights, but he's actually like this monster, and in reality, he's just like this perverted predator who rapes like his assistant and stuff. So it's interesting to sort of see now here in 2020 a book that's kind of like riffing on this idea of these like Hollywood creepos, right? But I thought this book also had a pretty cool setting, a cool Northern California setting, especially the island. It's on this rocky, wind-blown coast. I thought, that's classic Gothic horror, atmosphere, right? In the book, we also get these alternating epistolary chapters written by a servant of the great-grandfather who owned the castle, and kind of getting that way, getting caught up with the exposition and learning the background of the castle, the inhabitants of the castle, also the monster and how the monster comes to be. And, because the diary entries are written in early 20th century, it's written in that sort of florid early 20th century style, which I thought felt authentic. I thought it was, well done. Sometimes you read authors trying to do like 19th century or early 20th century style, language, and it just does not land. It doesn't feel like accurate at all, but he did a good job. One small gripe I have here is that Jonathan Janz uses like quite generic names for its characters, so it was hard for me in the beginning of the book, at least. Like the first quarter of the book, I kept mixing up like who is who. He's got names like Ben and Chris and Ryan, and I kind of hate it when authors use just like super generic names like that. It just makes it hard to sort of follow. It's just very bland and unmemorable, right? But another thing with this book, while I did praise the story, I do feel like it does get almost a little too convoluted in the latter half. For instance, there's this mercenary character who is introduced and is meant to sort of be like a human evil, which is a common trope in horror, to introduce like a human antagonist who is often much more heinous than the supernatural or creature antagonists. But in this case, I kind of forgot like what his purpose was at some certain points. I just felt like that whole subplot was a little superfluous almost. Didn't need to be there. There were overall just I think a tad too many characters for my liking. I mean, just reading that synopsis a moment ago, I remember like Jesus, like why are there so many characters being brought up, even in the synopsis alone, right? So but that's just like a personal preference of mine. I think some people really like books that have like a lot of characters. The finale is pretty fantastic. It gets pretty wild. Definitely, the author amps it up in the final third of the book. Some awful people get their comeuppance in delightfully grisly ways. Definitely had a satisfying conclusion, and it makes me want to continue this series because the author. This is the first book of a continuing series. The second one is House of Skin, which I, would like to read next. Not to be confused with Tim Curran's novel House of Skin, which I also highly recommend, especially for fans of Clive Barker's Hellraiser. But going back to Jonathan Janz, I did enjoy this book, and I definitely look forward to continuing this series and also just reading his other books because he's, quite a talented writer, and I think definitely one of the more, satisfying horror writers of the current day. So gets a recommendation from me. All right, and our third and final book that we're going to be talking about today is Urban Gothic by Brian Keene. This book was first published by Leisure, the now defunct Leisure, in 2009. And then a couple of years later, it was, after Leisure then collapsed, it was reprinted by Deadeye Press in 2011. I'll go ahead and read the synopsis for Urban Gothic. When their car broke down in a dangerous neighborhood of the inner city, Carrie and her friends thought that they would find shelter in the old dark row house. They thought it was abandoned. They thought they would be safe there until morning. They were wrong on all counts. The residents of the row house live in the cellar and rarely come out in the light of day. They're far worse than anything on the streets outside. And they don't like intruders. Before the sun comes up, Carrie and her friends will fight for their very lives, though death is only part of their nightmare. So, this is the first Brian Keene book I've read, and some may think that it's an odd choice to start with this one because he has much, more acclaimed books, but I'll tell you why I chose this one. Because it should be noted that this book is dedicated to Edward Lee. The second time I mentioned Edward Lee, hence the t-shirt I'm wearing. And it probably has maybe the best dedication page that I've ever read. For his dedication to Edward Lee, Brian Keene writes, "For Edward Lee, who once gave me crabs." And this is a joke referring to the Florida beach dwelling Mr. Lee, who does love his seafood. So, that's great. But this book, first of all, I love books that take place over the course of a single night. I love that. I think that they're usually very, fastly plotted, well, very engaging. They're page turners for the most part, if they're done well, right? So in this book, we get some teenagers, who have just graduated from high school. We get three couples. They drive into Philly from the suburbs on a hot summer night to attend a rap concert. And then after the concerts, one of the dudes wants to score some weed. So they go into the ghetto, basically. And then their car breaks down on the worst possible street and run into a whole bunch of trouble. Basically, and trouble, which honestly they themselves bring upon themselves, and it is, they get what they're asking for. So it's kind of almost satisfying in a way to find, to see these sort of like entitled white kids get what they're asking for, or get what's coming to them, I should say. But this book has a great setting. The squalid urban decay of this Philadelphia neighborhood, replete with like pawn shops and old houses. We got like hookers with sores dotting their lips, shambling down the streets. Broken windows. It's just festering, like you can just feel sort of like the festering decay of this neighborhood. Really good. And the house itself, which these teenagers run into, they think for safety. This old Victorian house is great. It's got like this weird, like surreal design with these labyrinthine hallways that double back in on themselves. All of the windows are painted over and boarded up from the inside, so there's no escape. It's cool. And then the inhabitants of this house or underneath the house are super cool. We get misshapen mutant freakazoids of all kinds. We get mutant dwarves. We get mutant giants, mutant babies. And the things that these guys do. We get a mutant who wears a woman's skin. We get war hammers. We get severe head trauma. We get eyeball trauma. We get dismemberment. We have some rat skeletons, cannibalism, horny teenagers. It's everything that you could want. One of these mutants has a mallet that he uses, or actually, as it's written in the book, it's a warhammer, which basically is like a chunk of granite affixed to an iron pipe. Which he uses, and I'll read a passage in a minute of what happens with that warhammer. But I thought Brian Keene. I mean, I've heard about him for years. I don't know why it's taken me so long to read him. I really enjoyed the prose style. It's written in an economical yet visual and vivid prose style. It's not burdensome, but it is still conjures up imagery, which I like. I think his paragraphs sometimes do run on a little too long, but that's maybe just me being used to reading just like some, pulp horror stuff. But, I thought this book had great horror action set pieces. I will read to you guys, if I can find it here, a short excerpt detailing one of the teenagers after her head is bashed in with a mutant warhammer. Let's see here. Brett screamed. Something was wrong with her face. He saw it as she slid down to the floor. Her features were mashed together. Her eyes and nose and mouth, they were too close. Her lips he'd kissed just an hour ago, were smashed almost beyond the point of recognition. Her head wasn't round anymore. Instead, it looked like a deflated basketball. The top of it was split open, and inside that red chasm was something that looked like curds of jellied lasagna. That's great. I love that stuff, right? So as I mentioned, there's some really cool and well-described mutants in this book, especially in the final third. At times, the story almost plays out like a video game, like with these teenagers working their way through the different layers or levels of the house. At one point, the hallway that they're running down literally terminates, and there are three rooms, and they have to choose which room to go in. So it definitely kind of reminded me of like a gory video game. There's some social commentary in this book as well. Keene here seems to make a pointed observation about society's lack of caring when it comes to poor, or more specifically Black neighborhoods, and how things kind of just often get overlooked or swept under the rug when the people dealing with these terrible things happen to be the wrong color. So I thought that was well done. I really liked Keene's characterization of these Black kids who live in the neighborhood. I thought they were much more likable than the white protagonists. And I thought that every time that they were there, I kind of perked up a little bit. I do feel like the dialogue did not ring true with these Black kids, though. It definitely felt like a sort of coming to middle-age white dude trying to do sort of that type of speak, but a little too scared to go all the way, using dialect or he wisely knows his limits, right? He doesn't attempt to write with ebonics or anything like that, but it just, I don't know, it didn't. I would have liked almost if he had taken some chances with the dialogue. I didn't feel like I was reading like Black Kids in the Hood when I read the dialogue, unfortunately. Also, another gripe with the dialogue is the mutants themselves. When they start speaking in this book, I felt like their dialogue was a little too trite and pedestrian. It kind of detracted a little bit from the mystery of the book. And I'm not one of these people who thinks that all, killers need to remain silent. Like, when people say, oh, Jason's a good slasher because he's just silent and menacing and Freddy Krueger is too jokey. No, I love it when killers speak. But, I felt like in this case the dialogue didn't really fit with the mutants themselves. But overall, though, I mean, this book is really, really fun. I mean, it starts off with some nods to Richard Lehman with these teenagers, and then it goes into full-blown Edward Lee territory. You can see why he dedicated the book to Mr. Lee. And, it's just a lot of fun. It was probably my favorite of the three books. Overall, I'd say I got the most enjoyment out of this one. I'm really looking forward to reading more Brian Keene now. I've got Ghoul and like a couple other ones loaded up on my Kindle. And I'm particularly excited because apparently Brian Keene has finally finished his follow-up or sequel to Urban Gothic, Suburban Gothic. So I will definitely be reading that when it comes out. I'm looking forward to that. It was a blast. I enjoyed it. And I think, this is leisure, right? This is end of the road leisure books, and it definitely is worthy of being in that, in that library. So, yeah, that's it, guys. Those are the three books that I'm talking about for this video. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you've read these books or have thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Check back soon. I apologize for the delay, and I know this video, I meant to get this thing done like weeks ago, actually, and, some stuff came up, but I hope to be on a more consistent schedule moving forward. I'm going to go back to there's going to be a couple more vintage horror book reviews, and then I'll get back to these because I have a ton more of these, newer, post-2000 horror books on my Kindle, which I'm very excited to read and talk about with you guys. So anyway, thanks for watching. Until next time, take it easy. I'll see you later. Peace.